Hello, listeners. My name is C. Thornley, and today is our day of reckoning.
It is. It's finally arrived.
So my name's C. Thornley, as I mentioned, and today I'm playing the cello banjo.
And I'm Emily Wolfe, and I play the fiddle.
And we're in somebody else's house today, folks. We haven't broken in. This isn't a...
No, they let us in.
Don't call the cops. It's all above board. You might have heard us mention in the first season, we had the robot Steve Gadd and various other iterations of Steve Gadd. Well, today, ladies and gentlemen, we've got the real McCoy. Ha-ha!
Real McCoy. Dinky dive.
That's not me on banjo, folks. We have Steve and Marjorie Gadd joining us in their house. Fantastic. And the reason why we came down and thought come down to Steve's house is because we thought we'd spend some time on this episode having a bit of an examination of some of the tunes by the Apple Isle fiddler Eileen McCoy.
And getting corrected by lack of just
I knew we'd have our comeuppance today.
Yep. It's like getting a report card.
Yeah.
We're going through all the dot points.
Oh, please don't feel like that.
It's fine. No, we definitely deserve some of it.
Oh no, please feel like that.
That's fine.
One of our Huon Heritage players, I saw her last night, and she said, "Oh, I love those podcasts. I listen to all of them, but gee, they get it wrong so often."
Hey, but we admit that we're wrong,
Yeah.
so that's good. We
Life's for learning, isn't it?
P's get degrees.
That is right,
That's
and that's
correct.
what we strive on.
So, Steve, you had quite involvement with Eileen McCoy.
Yeah, Eileen came down and stayed with us in 2004.
Right.
Because 2004 was only pretty much the fourth birthday of the Tasmanian Heritage Fiddles.
Right.
And I wanted to get, at that stage, there was still a lot of the old traditional players alive, and I wanted to get them all together. So there was a guy called Tex Crawford that was a hillbilly player from down the valley, but he passed away about a week before the festival.
Oh, wow.
Oh no!
And we got Eileen McCoy, the Apple Isle fiddler, who is, probably the greatest folk fiddler that Tasmania had produced, and she was living in Bega, so we had to get Rob Willis from the National Library to drive her down because she wouldn't fly.
Bega in New South Wales.
Yeah.
So she would have had to drive from Bega to Melbourne, get on the ferry.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
And they got as far as Oatlands or something, and the car broke down. And then they had to sort of borrow a vehicle or something.
Wow.
And they got here, and then Eileen's fiddle had come apart.
Oh no!
It had come unglued. And Eileen was quite elderly at the time, though she was a terrible flirt. And she called me her very special boy, and she was so glad that she'd actually got to meet me in the flesh. And
That is great.
So she came down with her fiddle, and the fiddle was broken, and she was really upset about it. But Marjorie managed to find someone that could fix it up.
Yeah.
So we got it fixed up. And as far as how old was Eileen then? Well, she kept on saying to me, Steve, I'm going to reach the big 80 soon. And Rob Willis has sort of slipped into my ear. She reached the big 80 at least 4 or 5 years ago.
Oh wow!
But she also came with her partner, Corny.
Oh, Corny
And
Brand.
and I didn't know that they were an item.
Yeah.
And when they arrived at Jane's place, I sort of made sure there were 2 rooms there, and she nudged me and she said, "Oh, Marge, we just bunked down together in showbiz."
She sounded like a real character.
She was so lovely.
Oh,
and
that's
she
awesome.
wore these woolen pantsuits. Like she was immaculate, like
Yep.
always immaculately dressed. She also had cowgirl shirts and things with embroidery
fantastic.
and stuff.
But she used to, when she first joined the Real McCoys, she was too shy to play on stage.
Yep.
And she used to play her parts backstage behind the curtain.
Really?
Oh,
Yeah.
Wow.
It took her a long time to get out in front of an audience.
okay.
And if you listen to her in the mix on some of Athel's albums too, that he did quite a few country and western albums.
Mm-hmm.
You can hear her playing, but often she'll sit behind an accordion player. Like she's not big in that, she's not right up front in the mix.
Yep.
Which is really interesting. See, She was a bush fiddler from the Ulverston, Guns Plains area, and she'd learnt from her family and her neighbours, a lot of whom she was related to. She had her brothers played fiddle and accordions and things, and a neighbour played tunes on Swanee whistle, believe it or not, and they used to play for a dance every fortnight in Guns Plains. So they were just always playing these bush dance tunes. And her first marriage sort of fell apart, and
This was not Ethel McCoy.
no, this is pre-Ethel. She was married to someone from that rural area,
Right.
in northern Tasmania, and she met up with Ethel. I don't know how they actually met, but it sort of, someone said, "Oh, you know, she plays fiddle too," and he said, "Oh, you play fiddle?" And she was just absolutely frozen with fear, you know.
Really?
Oh, that's
Yeah.
Yeah.
And because Ethel had a bit of a reputation as being, he recorded and he toured with Slim Dusty and Tex Morton.
Yep.
And Reg Lindsay, toured around Australia, and he had a couple of albums to his name already. And so she went on tour with him, and eventually they married. But like Marjorie said, for about the first 6 or 8 months, she hid behind the curtain on stage, and the fiddler
That's
could
amazing.
not be seen.
Yeah.
And so from about 1968, or maybe a bit earlier, maybe 67, they toured all around Australia, did all the Aboriginal stations and reserves and all the outback towns. And they toured with Slim Dusty and with Tex
Wow.
Morton.
So he was a bit of a star, Ethel, was he?
Yeah.
And he was from Tasmania?
Yeah, he was
Yeah,
from Tasmania.
right.
He was from... I'm not 100% sure where he's from, but I know he had relatives that were living up near Mount Roland, Sheffield area.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Yeah, and there was still some living up there until fairly recently.
Right. Now you mentioned she was the best fiddler, one of the best fiddlers we've produced. What was so good about her?
She was eclectic. She picked up hundreds of tunes, and if you ever heard Eileen just in a room on her own with a fiddle, she would play one tune after another, and sometimes she'd make up tunes by adding bits of tunes to each other, like taking 4 bars of this and sort of basically improvising new tunes based on bits of old folk tunes. And we could never get to the end of her repertoire.
Right.
It was so vast. The other thing is she was quite skilled, and for a self-taught bush fiddler, and she had 3 main strands to her bow, metaphorically. She had all the bush music tunes that have been passed down for generations in northern Tasmania, and there are hundreds of those. And then she had met Angus Cameron when he first came over from Scotland. He's another sort of person that played all the shed dances in the 60s in Tassie.
Right. Yeah.
He was a Scots village style player, as against, he didn't play the Neil Gow, Nathaniel Gow, the high art Scottish music like Chris Duncan would play, but he played the village music, which is a lot closer to Tassie music except with Scottish inflections.
Right.
And she learnt stacks of stuff off him, and including the Spanish Waltz.
Yep.
Yeah. And
Which we played on the podcast.
Which we have, yes.
Can't remember what
and
episode, but
then when she was touring in a tent show that had country and western musicians, and there was a fiddle player called Peter Mollison, whose parents were Scandinavian, but he was brought up in Canada. So he had both Canadian and Scandinavian styles in his playing, and he taught Eileen a whole stack of stuff.
right.
But she'd also pick up tunes from everywhere.
She didn't actually write music, so she had. Is that right?
I think she was completely musically illiterate.
Right. So she was storing all this in her head. She didn't have a book of tunes.
No.
Right.
She probably would have had a book of set lists for different performances.
Right.
And so just the name of the tune, and the way she remembered tunes was she had little mnemonic devices based on the sound of the tune, onomatopoeic devices.
Right.
Like, as you know, take your boots off and go to bed, boy.
Yeah.
Da-da-dee-da-da-da-da-dum,
Yeah.
da-da-dee, da-da-da-da-dum.
You like that tune.
That's
Yeah.
my favourite. Yeah.
So she had lots of those little phrases that
Yeah.
reminded her of how tunes started.
Yeah,
Yes.
right. Wow.
Learning so much today.
Yeah, I know. We really should do our research, but I do quite like bullshitting a lot. So
Yeah.
I
Just another thing about, just to follow up that question about, what was so good about Eileen.
Yeah.
Like, Eileen was very humble, and when we met her, she was already well into her 80s, and, it's very hard for people that age to play anywhere near as well as they did. If you listen to her on Athel's records, her intonation is really good.
Yep.
But she had this sort of folky intonation and often tuned her violin sharp or flat of concert pitch later on. And her fingers sometimes didn't quite get to the notes in time. But she played us Home Sweet Home, didn't she?
I was wondering about that because with Home Sweet Home, the variations that she was doing do go into third position, so that they do show you've got a lot of facility up the instrument as well as across. So I'm wondering how she got there. Usually as a student you get a license before you go up there.
Yes, you do. You give them a P's.
Yes.
You go through a driving test, make sure they can do it.
Yeah.
But she was very proficient, and in the way that she moved around the instrument.
Yeah.
Just spoke of really good technique.
Right.
And I'm wondering, where she must have had somebody who showed her how to do that, how to get the correct positioning of the fingers and whatnot.
Somewhere along the way.
But she wouldn't give much away really.
No.
I don't think she spoke about where she learnt.
No. She'd always talk about which people she got tunes from.
Yeah.
But Cornelis Brandenburg, her partner, said, that violinists come from all over the place to learn her version of Home Sweet Home. And I was sort of thinking about her version of Home Sweet Home. It's heavily arpeggiated, and it's basically what Earl Scruggs does on banjo when he plays.
It's very
he played all
virtuosic.
the notes in the rolls. She played all the notes in the rolls and the tune, but on the violin using string crossing and positions up and down the neck. So she could do that. So in a day, she'd been quite virtuosic.
Yeah.
Did she record that tune?
Yeah,
I don't
there is
know.
one.
Is it on the Apple Isle Fiddler? Because that'll be the only place I've got it.
So the Apple Isle Fiddler is a compilation of her tunes, is that right?
Yeah, Apple Isle Fiddler is an amazing CD of her playing with people mostly from Wongawilli. She also had Alan Musgrove playing with her on guitar. I don't know whether you met Alan. He was very much a collector of Australian folk music. So they tracked her down at Bega when she was living in New South Wales after Athel and her retired from playing live, and then Athel passed on. So she lived a lot longer than Athel, and people would go up there. A lot of the bush music collectors would go and visit her. So the Wongawilli people went and saw her, and what's the name of the woman that played fiddle for Wongawilli? She moved to England. Can't remember her name.
Oh, tall woman. Oh.
Jane Brownlee. Jane Brownlee, yeah.
Right.
So Jane Brownlee plays with her on that CD, and Jane's got great chops, and they've got a great band. It's all really tight, and tempos are really controlled because Eileen liked to push the tempos a bit.
Right.
Yeah. Sometimes if you're playing with Eileen, you sort of have to just follow her.
Right.
But she didn't sit. She didn't sit in the music. She flew ahead, and you'd go with wherever she went.
You just followed.
Yeah, so that's and that's got a lot of that. Apple Isle Fiddler is available, I think, on the internet still. There's still people that are selling it.
Oh, good.
Right.
I've got a copy of it here. If you want to listen to it.
Yeah, it'd be good to listen to
Very
it.
good, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so shall we have a listen to one of Eileen's tunes? Now, during this, folks, it's going to be a little bit different. Normally, you used to just me and Emily sitting around the kitchen table and I'm playing the old banjo and she's playing fiddle. Well, today I've walked into Steve's house of toys and I am in love with one of them, and it's this creature.
Is that me?
No, it's...
You're not one of my toys. I'm the toy.
He's the toy boy.
What have we walked
Carl's
into?
in banjo heaven, and he's got the cello banjo.
The cello banjo. So a cello banjo is tuned an octave down from a normal banjo. So you can still do it. But I'd much rather go. I'm just. Wow.
I don't think we're actually going to leave your house
Actually, the
tonight.
bark stuff
This car's
sounds
going
great
to
on
be
the cello banjo.
Yeah, right. So. Wow.
It's just too excited. It's like a kid and a candy store, listeners. Oh, look, you are
So I'm gonna. I've been saving up for a house, but I think I might buy one of these instead.
Fair enough.
Wait, I'm still gonna need somewhere to put it.
Yeah, you're still going to...
So this first tune we're going to do.
Yes.
We better stop.
Yeah, we
talking
better do
and play
tunes.
it soon.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we'll lose the audience.
Indeed.
It's called 1, 2, 3, 4, and this is an example of Eileen picking up a tune like from anywhere. There was a very competent mandolin player in Tassie back in the 50s and 60s called Ron Crane, and this is one she got from Ron Crane. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Okay.
Does it come after 4 beats? 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, and.
So that was 1, 2, 3, 4, a tune from the Eileen McCoy repertoire. Great. So why is it called 1, 2, 3, 4?
I've no idea. Right. Who knows why any of these tunes are called what they're called. The funny thing is that when you collect from the older bush musicians, have pretty much all passed on. But when one collected from them, just go through any of those collections and you find that very similar tunes are named completely differently by different players.
Right.
The
Yeah.
Dawsons had one called Do Do Ditchity Do because that's the rhythm
Wow.
at the beginning of the piece. They couldn't remember the name, so they just...
I remember. Yeah, I remember that
Ditchity
tune.
do.
Yeah.
That's a great tune too.
There you go.
So I guess it's just a sort of joke. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's what you'd count if you were
Coming in.
playing
Coming
it.
in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Extraordinary. So the next tune we'll play from the Eileen McCoy repertoire is Captain Jig. Is that right?
Yep.
Great.
So why is Captain Jig called Captain Jig? Again, we don't know. We don't know where Eileen picked it up or
Right.
anything about its history at all. But anyway.
It's a nice jig.
Is this one that you transcribed from her, or is this one that came from someone else?
I can't remember whether this was my transcription or Maggie Duncan's or half hers and half mine.
Right.
Like,
Yep.
um,
Because as we said earlier, Eileen didn't write anything down, so
No.
it would have been all been listening to her recordings.
but a lot of people did tape her playing.
Yes.
And a lot of people have... I mean, Alan Musgrove did transcriptions of her stuff.
Yep.
Maggie Duncan did transcriptions of her stuff. Olya Anya Willis did some. Fred did a couple, I think.
It's Fred Pryback.
Yeah, I think he pretty sure he did a couple.
Right.
And the Wonga Willie people have done a few.
Right.
Yeah, right.
Dave DeSanti, he did a few. So.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so
lots of people did.
Oh yeah.
Lots of people, yeah.
So Dave DeSanti, he's up in New South Wales there.
He was at Wollongong, but he's in Brisbane now, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, he's up in Brisbane these days.
So people from all over Australia would have descended upon her. And,
yeah.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah, so it's that with the Tasmanian stuff, we wanted to focus specifically on Tassie stuff, not on generic, not on broadly Australian music, because we just wanted to narrow the focus of what we were collecting and playing, and we wanted stuff that had within it stories about where we live and about our ancestors and our towns, etc. Whereas there's so much material from the mainland, but on the mainland, the Tasmanian folkies are just considered other important sources. So all the mainland bands play all the Tassie stuff as well. It's just that we and you don't. We just play the Tassie stuff, and that's it.
So they come down here and rip us off.
That's right. We've been saying it for years.
Oh, that's so mainland. Oh,
but something about gathering up all these bits from the last 200 years, and during these sort of Appleshed dance era, when a lot of these people were still alive, you could pick up so many treasures. And versions of tunes that would not be heard anywhere else, even though the source of the tune might be Scotland or the US or Ireland or England or Poland or Czechoslovakia or Denmark, the versions down here just are quite unique, and so we thought we'd just thread them all together, put them all in collections together, and get people to play them and feel proud about them.
Yes.
Feel proud about having your own music.
Yeah, I think that's really important, because you do feel you're brought up as a derivative culture. Everything happens somewhere else. But if you can inculcate in your teaching or whatever it is that music is a live thing and that you are part of it. So you can create a tune, you can do one yourself. I remember Peter Sculthorpe's teacher told him when he was learning piano, Peter, all the composers are dead. And that's the sort of the way we were brought up, everything important happens somewhere else.
Yeah. So Peter Sculthorpe, just for the listeners, he was a Tasmanian classical composer of some renown.
Yeah. He was probably 20th century's most important Australian composer. Yeah.
That was my phone. How unprofessional.
But the shift is within the person, in the student.
Yes.
So that they don't feel as if they're a secondary consideration in their music education. that they're not sort of the holder of something from somewhere else, but they can explore their own creativity.
Yes.
And it's legitimate and it's wonderful.
Yeah, that's how I look. That's what enamoured me with the Heritage Fiddle Ensemble and also with Tassie Tunes. And because I think I moved here 6 years ago, but my family is from here. My great grandfather used to own the Moona pub, and my nan was here. And she used to tell me. My nan used to tell me stories of when she'd travel on the ferry during the war from wherever it was to Melbourne, and how they had to turn all the lights and you weren't allowed to smoke a cigarette or anything like that. And,
right.
But then my family moved over to Victoria and kind of lost touch with all that Tassie stuff, and coming back it was almost like a homecoming. But
we'll have to talk more. We might be related.
We could all be related. We could all be related.
Yeah.
It's pretty scary, but it's...
and that's what the thing I love about it. It's not so much that, in a sense, they're not a blank slate, but actually they kind of are in a way, because what I think they are is because we make such good apple cider here too, right? And it's about the
get there.
It's about the microbiology. You take the whatever it is. It's not bacteria. It is bacteria. You take the stuff and you ferment it, and it creates something unique and special.
Yes,
that's how I feel. Each dot on the page is a little seed of goodness.
Yeah.
It's interesting when we first started going to visit the Dawsons in about 2002. 2002. I think we started going to visit Edie and Paddy, and we had this sort of sense of superiority. Like, these are just untutored musicians that can't read music and they don't know any theory, and you know, they play a little bit out of tune and out of time. And after a while, we go there and we try and play along with them, and we impose our musical sensibilities on the music. So
Right.
I would add sort of bluegrass or jazz elements, and Marjorie would add classical elements, and suddenly we realised that we were pushing the tunes out of their comfort zone into a place where they didn't belong, and we were missing the point of the tunes as previous generations felt and loved these tunes and collected them for a certain reason, and that reason is crystallised in an emotional feeling. And so we had to try and find that, and we sort of realised that then at that point the Dawsons became our teachers. We weren't just people that were collecting music from them. And we stopped actually collecting. We just went up and visited and played with them and soaked in their love for us and for the music. I'm tearing up here a bit.
Oh, it's very emotional.
Oh, well, I miss them so much.
Yeah,
So who were the
found
Dawsons?
the piece. They're a brother and sister. Live up Swamp Road, about a couple of kilometres from here. They lived their lives in a very humble fashion. They were accordion players, and they were just marvellous musicians. Like Eileen, they had hundreds of tunes under their fingers. In fact, when they got together at Eileen, they clicked straight away.
Yeah.
Of course.
Same repertoire.
They went off in different directions, about between 4 and 8 bars through most of the tunes. Because all these tunes, because
They'd
people
get it
learn them by
together in
Chinese
the end.
whispers,
Yeah.
every town has a slightly different take on
Yeah.
the tune.
Right.
I only met Edie once. It was at a bush dance in town, and when I told her my name, my surname, she's like Wolfe, and she said that she played with my grandfather, Curly Wolfe, at a dance, because my grandfather used to play a lot of dances.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's great, because he died long before I was born,
Yeah.
so that was really special. That's the only one time I met her. Yeah.
Well, before we get too far down this
Yeah,
rabbit
let's
hole,
play a tune.
let's play this Captain Jig tune from Eileen
Yes.
McCoy's
Do you want
repertoire.
the intro, love?
Okay.
That was Captain Jig from the Eileen McCoy collection.
I made a mangle of that one.
Well, as you know, folks, if you listen in, the whole point of this podcast is to just sit around the kitchen table. In this case, we're sitting around a room full of microphones, and just let it happen as it happens. We don't do double takes or anything like that. It's just as though you'd walked into a session that's
Yeah.
raw and beautiful. You're not going to get mistakes like... You pay for mistakes like this in the city. Top dollar.
Top dollar. But here you get them for free.
Steve, I wanted to ask you, how do you feel about... So you mentioned about seeing the Dawsons and understanding this music in its sort of original form. How do you feel about it changing? Like as other generations come in and pick these tunes up and put their input in. As you said, you came in with your input and put it in and then had that awakening. Should these tunes change? Should we keep
They
them
should.
as-
Yeah, they should change, and we've done all kinds of things with them. But it's good to listen to the field tapes and listen to the way they were played and get some of that feeling in. Just because it is kind of a uniquely Tasmanian feeling in that music. It's quite hard to explain. I'll give you some recordings to listen to of of Eileen later, and you can sort of pick up a little bit of it. So you listen to this music, and it doesn't sound like a lot of Australian bush music, though it's closely related. It doesn't sound like Irish music. It doesn't sound like bluegrass or old-timey American music. It has its own space.
Mm.
Yeah, and there are a lot of different influences in it, so it's not one thing.
But I think there is room for that sort of idea of the preservation, and I think Julie and Stuart do that very well. They're more the sort of preservation way of doing it than we are. We'll sort of muck around with things, and especially when you're working with a big group, you can't do it exactly the way Eileen did it, or the Dawsons, or whoever. Yeah. So it's sort of, I guess a culture has more than one leg to stand on, so it can be something that you use as a template to go off and do other things. It can be, well, how did such and such do this? Oh, she did that bit in third position, I must do that the same, or whatever. So I think there's room for everything with this music.
Definitely. Well, we definitely put our little take on tunes.
Yeah. So my approach is learn the dots and understand the chords, and then that goes into a little container, and I put that on the shelf, and I just pull out a copy of that, and I just put everything in it and muck around. It's like a recipe. I've got the base recipe, but
do your own thing.
Put a bit of that in.
And then when you listen back to it, or when you've sort of played it for a few people, you might think maybe that was sort of not quite what it needs, and maybe it needs more swing, or maybe it needs to be played straighter, and you eventually find a place where the tune sits for you. But the important thing is that you don't come to the tune with a big preconception, but you try that recipe book, you try to add all the different spices, and then you pull back and you have the core tune in your mind as your reference point. And as far as developing goes, as Emily's played in a sort of classical string piece I wrote based on Tassie tunes, and I've taken it, into art music, and we've both done like chamber folk with it a lot, and we've also we swing a lot of the Lang tunes, for instance, and put
we mucked around with the Lang tunes.
We mucked around with the Lang tunes.
put jazz chords to them, because they it softens up some of that harsh militaristic sound that the early 19th century Scots influence stuff had. Yeah, but
this is probably turning in his grave.
Well, I don't think of it as softening. I think of it as flipping him the bird. But anyway.
So should we have a look at this next one?
Indeed.
Yeah, let's do it.
So Gran McCoy's Schottische, is that the next one?
Yeah, so it's Ethel McCoy, McCoy's mum. That's Ethel McCoy, the country and western singer that was Eileen McCoy's second husband.
Did they have kids? Ethel and Eileen?
I'm not 100% sure.
Okay, sure.
I know that she had kids, but I'm not sure whether they were from the first marriage or from Ethel.
Okay.
They had a fairly busy on-the-road sort of life. It was fairly frantic. Those days when the early country singers and yodelers used to tour all around the outback.
That was huge back in the 50s and 60s.
The only way a lot of those places heard music, because they were out of radio range.
Yeah.
And it was good. A classic example is Slim Dusty. He built up that sort of huge fan base simply by going to country towns, and Tex Morton did. There's a little bit of a story about the Tassie stuff versus the hillbilly stuff. Back in the late 30s and early 40s, Tex Morton and one of the other early country singers visited Tassie and went round and played at all the local halls, and he had his Wild West show with his whip and his hypnotism and his yodeling and his cowboy hats, and he sang a lot of the American stuff as well as some of the Australian bush ballads. But after in those days when people toured Tassie, they stayed for months, so they stay in each town for a week or two. Right. And after he left, a lot of the bush musicians went out and bought cowboy hats and started playing American songs. Yeah,
right. So Tex, he was Canadian, was he?
No, he was from New Zealand, born in New Zealand.
Right.
Okay.
And then he moved to Australia, and then he moved to the US. And a lot of Americans think that he was actually American. And then he moved back to Australia, and I think he then lived occasionally in Australia and occasionally in New Zealand.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So they went out and bought Stetson hats and started playing hillbilly bluegrass music.
And the old people hated it. They hated that they weren't playing the old bush music anymore.
Right.
That they were doing sort of Red River Valley and all the cowboy.
You know, it's funny because compared to them, I'd be a super young person, and I hate it too. I hate.
There's not many
American
things you
stuff.
like, actually.
No, there is a few things I like, and they're very important. But no, the American stuff. One thing I find all the time, and I've said this many times on the podcast, and I also stand on street corners and shout it out at the kids, but they don't get it.
He does.
It's
we've got a few complaints.
When you go to the folk sessions, especially in the mainland, it's bluegrass or it's this or that, and you ask them, have you got any Australian tunes? And they haven't got one, not even Waltzing Matilda. They haven't got a single Aussie tune. And that breaks my heart. Because, and what's going to happen is they're going to meet their bluegrass heroes, and they're going to say, gee, you play all that American music real good, play us one of your tunes.
Yes.
And they're going to be like, they don't know.
They don't know.
Yeah.
Haven't got any. What happened to you, mate? Crikey. Oh, so what happened to you, man?
Well,
Waltzing Matilda and Click Go the Shears, and that's it.
Yeah. And
Well, keep shouting it out at the kids on the street.
yeah, that I'm
Yeah, keep doing it. All right, maybe let's get on to this.
Gran McCoy's Schottish.
Gran McCoy's.
Here we go. Schottische.
Nice.
Beautiful.
I like that tune. We only looked at that just before we recorded, but I like it.
Yeah. It seems to be closely related to, I think, Flowers of the Mountain or Flowers of the Forest Schottische, which is a very old Scottish tune. Right. And there's a hornpipe that is played in Irish sessions called the Smoocher hornpipe, which is actually really a Schottish.
Right. And
that has a very similar tune. This is a particularly... I mean, they're all a little bit different from each other, but they have the same sort of form.
The lovely ambience of barking country dogs.
It's great.
Can you hear that, listeners? That's because we're out in the field, just like in real life.
Yes. We've put gags on all the neighbours so they
we don't
make
have.
sound.
Oh, really?
we don't have my cat meowing this time.
Trevor with his V8 ute.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes, there's a few of those around.
He said, "Can I come and play me ute at your podcast?" No, Trevor, no. So he
We've
does
said-
burnouts at the roundabout out
Yeah,
front.
we've told him no every week.
No. Yeah.
So this next tune is actually two tunes. The first one is Joe the Railway Porter, which we're playing in C, but Eileen would sometimes play it in G.
Mm.
So I don't know, I actually can't work out why I put it into C. So we're playing Joe the Railway Porter, and then we're going into Frog Puddles Symmetrical. Now I call it symmetrical because I squared it off for purpose of dances, because Eileen used to play a couple of extra bars at the end that were sort of melodic dribbles coming out of the tune, and which is okay for a showpiece, but not so good for dancers. So for the sake of dancers, we'd often put these two tunes together.
Yes.
Yeah.
We've talked about, we had a dance podcast a couple of weeks ago. We were saying how if bars have to line up with the dance, otherwise it doesn't work.
Yeah, and sometimes you have to change tunes a little bit to make them fit.
Yeah.
If you think, oh, this would be a good tune, but it's just got 4 too many bars.
Right.
Yes.
Or it's got 2 too many bars. Or it hasn't got enough bars. So let's repeat the last four bars.
Yes, that's what I think. We've got a dance coming up next week and we've got nice scribbles out. I'm like, all right, that's the bars that work. Let's do that amount of bars. Yeah.
So Joe the Railway Porter, we don't know who he was?
No idea at all.
Right. And
It was Joe.
While we're talking about Joe the Railway Porter, I just want to talk a little bit about railways, because I think Eileen went to either Devonport or Launceston to get her first fiddle, and the deal was that she'd take it out on loan, and if she was allowed to keep it, she would go back and pay for it. And her father said she could get a violin provided she learned how to play a tune within a week. So she actually caught the train back home with the violin that was out sort of with a deposit in, and worked out a tune on the train on the way home. So she came out, pulled the violin out of its case and played a tune for her father straight away, and he said, okay, I'll have to buy it for you then.
Wow,
awesome.
That's awesome. That's a
So there's a bit of a railway kind of story there.
Wow. Yeah, that's charming. Awesome.
determination. That's awesome.
All right, so this is Joe the Railway Porter in the key of C, followed by Frog Puddles, and going back to Joe.
Yeah.
No, I think yes, that's right. Thank you for reminding me of the order.
Yeah.
So we've got 2 Frog Puddles, yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
Because it's...
I remember.
Just a little bit, just before we go on, Frog Puddles is a tune that all the Tassie Bush players would have some sort of version of. It was a very common tune. Every part of Tassie, there was someone that... The Dawsons had a version called Splash in a Frog Puddle, and Leo Donahue, the Donahue family, just played one called Frog Puddles. All very similar, but not quite the same, as is always the case.
Right.
All right.
Shall we begin?
Yes.
Do you want a little intro?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I missed the transition.
Very
The frog
sweet.
puddle.
Oh, really?
Don't know whether you could hear it.
I love your doodles, Em.
Thank you. That's a very technical violin
Yes.
term. The doodle.
So on the podcast, I'll just explain what's going on, listeners. We've got Steve Gadd is playing banjo, proper banjo today. Beside him is Marjorie Gadd on lead fiddle.
Oh no, there's no lead here.
There's no lead.
There's dual fiddle and dual banjo.
That was a rock and roll joke. And Emily Wolfe on the other fiddle, and I'm playing the cello banjo. So whilst Steve was missing that transition, I was desperately holding on to try and figure out how to play that tune on the cello banjo. Because it's an incredible instrument, but it's... oh, hello.
Oh, not a lawnmower.
Yeah, that's the dulcet tones of Australia there, folks.
Is that Trevor's cousin?
I don't know. Could be.
Should I go and give him a beer and tell him to have a break?
Well, I wish I could talk to the listeners and say, how do you feel about a lawnmower in the background? Because it does make it pretty Australian.
That's fine. We can.
Because one thing, when you come to Australia, what you're going to hear two sounds when you get out of the airport and into the suburbs. You're going to hear a magpie waddling, and you're going to hear some guy pushing a lawnmower. It's very important in Australia that we push lawnmowers, no matter how long the grass or short the grass is.
Yes. It'd be very wet at the moment.
Be very wet, and I bet you the grass is very short too. And he's just like, well, it's mower o'clock.
Mower o'clock. Gotta mow this. Gotta mow it. It's alright. It just adds to the atmosphere.
It's the atmosphere. Very well. We'll soldier on, folks. We'll soldier on. This happens a lot in Australia. Lawnmowers are very popular.
We could find a picture of it. That might help.
Yeah.
Play something like that.
Now, Steve, you've just changed
I think
instruments
it's in a
there.
sharp.
Tell me about what you're about to play.
Well, this one's called a Solana. It's made by the Deering Company, and it's basically a nylon string guitar banjo hybrid. So it's got a lovely big banjo pot, but it's got nylon strings and an extended classical guitar neck. You can go way up higher than you can on classical guitar into the sort of mandolin zone.
Is that lawnmower getting louder? Perhaps we should offer him a beer.
I love it. That's what I like about our podcast. They're unpredictable.
Yeah, totally. That is amazing. Wow.
Isn't that pretty?
It is pretty, yeah.
Even with the lawnmower in the
The
back.
instrument's very pretty as well.
It's pretty to look at, yeah, but it's pretty to look at, but it's a lovely compromise between the sound of a banjo and the sound of a classical guitar.
Right.
Usually these things don't work, but
Yeah.
Deering have come up with this fancy bridge that cuts out all the funny overtones. So
That's what you need.
the six-string, steel string guitar banjo hybrids I've played are horrible. You know,
Me
literally
too,
are
yeah.
horrible. The overtones don't line up; they don't work properly. So
Yeah.
they always sound a bit out of tune or a bit harsh.
Yeah.
But this just softens the whole thing beautifully.
I think Marjorie has just negotiated with the lawnmower and it's angered the dog. Yep.
Classic.
The dog was really looking forward to that grass being mowed.
Yep.
Now he's very angry.
There'll be a little bit of opportunity to cut some lawnmower out, will there, in the mix?
I'll do my best.
Hey, it's okay. That's
But
just,
in these situations, it's generally whatever happens in the atmosphere. is what
hopefully it's
happens.
entertaining for you at home.
But for the listeners at home, why are we getting all this noise? Because we're out in Steve and Marjorie Gadd's house in Franklin, in their music room, in the country.
Yeah, we're in the country, but we're in a little village, and our houses are fairly close together. So the dogs next door are loud, and the neighbours are loud. The lawnmowers are loud.
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
okay.
Luckily, we haven't got. If it was a weekday, we'd have big construction trucks going up the lane because there's a huge house being built right up on the hill.
Right.
Well, it's a good day. It's not a weekday then.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Cool. Well, in just a moment, Marjorie will be back and we'll crack on. How many songs have we got to go?
This is our last
This
one.
is the last one.
So,
Our last tune.
our last tune. Thank you, Marjorie. How'd you go? Bit of argy-bargy, or it was all amicable?
It was good.
Very good.
You just said argy bargy because it rhymes with.
Margie.
Yeah.
I get so much of that.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
We've heard lots of
Pain in
them
my
in.
assistance.
Yes,
Really?
lots of them.
Look, guys, I want to say thank you so much for opening your house up to us and having a chat about Eileen and your experiences there. It's just been wonderful. This is the last song we're going to do.
That's right.
That's Black Velvet Waltz. So is there a story behind this tune?
Yeah, this is one that this is a Tassie version of a Canadian tune that the Canadians took from, I guess it probably came from Scotland via Cape Breton or Prince Edward Island. A lot of the tunes did, and the guy that Peter Mollison, who was of Scandinavian background but of Canadian citizenship, he came out and toured with the McCoys and a whole lot of other people. He taught Eileen a lot of music, and we're pretty sure that this is one that Eileen picked up because she picked up a fair bit of the Canadian repertoire,
right,
and some of the Scandinavian repertoire from Peter as well.
Huh.
So this was in the late 60s, early 70s. He would have picked up late 60s. She would have picked up this. I thought it went back further, but I've got no evidence that it was in Tasmania before Peter came over, and Peter definitely taught Eileen a lot of tunes. And Emily has played this with the East Pointers from Canada. Their B part is slightly different.
It is, and that was a fun experience to play our version and their version. We look at each other going, "Oh, that's different," but we just kept on going.
So let me just reiterate. In the B section, there's an A minor.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. In our version, but not theirs.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
And the melody takes a slightly different turn in the B part as well. And I remember them looking over and saying, "Oh, that's cool." I can remember Violet, I think it was Signet Folk Festival, playing it. Because you might not have been in there with that one.
No.
But yeah, Violet and Rebecca were playing along with the East Pointers, and they launched into the B part, and the guys they said afterwards, "Oh, that's really cool, that second section."
Yeah. It's kind of nice when that happens too, because you can share different versions of it, which is really awesome.
Yeah.
I love Canadian fiddlers.
Yeah.
Remember when the Sprague session came over?
Yes, and we taught them, and we had a session at Franklin Palais upstairs, and we played the Mrs. Champ's reel, and then they just broke out into the Mason's Apron.
Because they were collecting versions of the Mason's Apron and related tunes from around the world, and they had a whole stack of them.
Yeah.
And they said, "Oh, great, we've got another one."
Yeah.
Because Mrs. Champson's very closely related to Mason's Apron.
Yeah, it's really, really similar, and also I think they really liked the homebrew polka when we put Cooley's reel in it as well. So I think I think we played that with them.
Yeah,
they really enjoyed. That was fun. We played a gig with them in St David's Park.
Oh,
yeah, it was really cool.
Have you noticed how the B part of homebrew polka is almost the same as the Wellerman?
No, I haven't noticed that.
Do you know the Wellerman, that sea shanty that was really popular on TikTok a few months back?
No, I don't know. Yeah,
neither of us do TikTok either. So.
No, and we should. We're the generation that should.
Just do a YouTube search for the Wellerman, and you'll get thousands, because thousands of people covered it in space of a few weeks.
Okay,
fancy that.
That's what I have to do.
The B part's basically the Wellerman's basically like the tune is the B part of homebrew polka.
Oh, right. Listen to that.
All right. Well, this is the Black Velvet Waltz. This is our final song for this podcast. Thank you very much for listening. And from Eileen McCoy's repertoire. Velvet Waltz from the Eileen McCoy repertoire. That brings us to the end of the podcast for today, listeners. I've been CC Thornley and I've been playing this incredible machine.
And I've been Emily Wolfe and I've been playing the fiddle.
Our very special guests, or our very special hosts, I should say, Steve and Marjorie Gadd.
Thank you very much. And it's been so lovely to play with you.
Thank you.
I want you to come back
fun.
again and again.
Indeed.
It's been beautiful to play with you, Em.
Thanks.
We should
It's been
love
record an
yourself.
album together.
Yeah, well, I'd be up for that.
Just a really banjo heavy album.
I don't know, we could compete with that.
Banjo Symphony Orchestra.
At least we've got them on the long notes. You know.
Yes. That's
We can sustain.
Cool. Well, and thank you for the lend of your cello banjo. That has been just a fascinating exploration.
You're going to be very sad to leave that behind.
I'm getting one. I've decided I'm going to go home. I'm going to explain the finances to my girlfriend when I get home.
Good luck with that.
I'm going to go, look, she's very understanding when it comes to
I've got to
banjos.
go and give the neighbour a beer.
Indeed. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for coming, and it's all been good.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Excellent.
I hope the Steve Gadd bot wasn't too
Verbose. Verbose.
No, not at all.
Nice.
In fact, I have to apologise for you for destroying it. We owe you one, Steve Gadd. Probably a helicopter too. What was I going to say? Oh, that's right. Now, listen, folks. Like Steve said, we are grossly inaccurate with our information. So if we say something on the podcast that's incorrect, that's a cue for you to give us a message and correct us.
Yes, please.
And a couple of apologies I have to make. One of them is to some people who messaged us on Facebook, because Facebook doesn't notify me that we get messages. I missed those, so I'm very, very sorry to those two people who messaged us, but I did get back to you in time, and hope you're having a great time, and thank you so much for checking us out and getting the information you gave. Special thanks to a lady up in Brisbane who sent us her folk fiddle book. That's been a treat.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much, and that's it.
We'll see you next week.
Hooroo!